There was a Amish family that went to the mall, shopping mall for the first time. They were kind of fascinated by all the sights and sounds, and they saw this very shiny silver wall, and it opened and it closed. And behind it, the wall, there was a little room. And the father and the son just stood there fascinated watching this wall open and close. And then this elderly woman, very wrinkled, very, very heavy set, came up in her wheelchair and pushed the button, and the door opened, and in she went. And the father and the son watched the numbers light up, and then they watched them light up and go down, and the doors open again, and out stepped a beautiful young blonde. The father said to the son, "Son, go get your mother." Confusion, it's called. Sometimes we see things and we don't know exactly what they are, or more precisely, we don't know how to make sense of what we see, particularly our spiritual experiences. And sometimes it seems as if God has abandoned us, God is not walking with us, or that the universe is just conspiring against us to lay some really heavy stuff on it. And we get to that point where we just almost want to give up. That's the point that Elijah the prophet gets to in the first reading from the first book of Kings. You should take time this week to read the first book of Kings. In fact, read the first and second book of Kings. Great history, great stories, great theology, great spiritual lessons in those books. But Elijah, if you remember the story, right before this scene, he had just battled the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. And if you remember the scene, Elijah challenges the prophets to see whose God is real. And so there's some 150 or so false prophets there, and Elijah says, well, make your sacrifice, and then call upon your God to burn the sacrifices. And so they prepare the sacrifices, they start to pray and chant, dance around, start to slash themselves. And this went on for 8 hours, and no God came down to burn the sacrifice. So by sundown, it's Elijah's turn, and he says, prepare the sacrifices. Then he says, dig a trench around them, pour water in it, pour more water in it, pour more water in it. And he prays, and the God of Israel comes down and burns up the sacrifice. And then Elijah proceeds to slit the throats of 150 prophets, which is kind of a brutal detail, but remember, Israel at this point is still in its adolescence. So God still has to use extreme measures to teach them right from wrong. And as a result, the prophets were, of course, in cahoots with the queen, who was Jezebel. Jezebel sends the army, the police, everybody to get Elijah. And so Elijah is fleeing through the desert. And as he journeys, he just hits the wall. He gets exhausted. And so he lays down under the tree and says, Lord, just take me now. Take me now. And it's a great little scene because most of us at some point in our lives have that feeling. I just can't go on. Lord, just take me now. It doesn't seem worth it. For Elijah, that meant he knew what was coming. He knew the wrath of this very vindictive woman called Jezebel. And he knew she would probably get him in the end. And so he's exhausted. The angel appears to him and says, eat and drink that you may have strength for the journey. And he does it 2 times. You know, runners, bikers, marathon runners especially will describe this experience of hitting the wall. They get to a point where their body just stops. They can't take another step. They can't even move a muscle. And it happens when the body just completely shuts down, when it's overwhelmed. It can happen if you're sick and you can't eat. If you're in the hospital, have surgery, and maybe you're only being fed IV for several days, you know how weak your body becomes. It can be an effort just to get out of bed and walk a few steps to the chair. You become exhausted just with that effort. That's what would happen to Elijah. That's what often happens to us. And it's a great analogy for the spiritual life, a great metaphor to understand what happens to us spiritually if we do not nourish ourselves with good, solid spiritual food. You know, the human person has an orientation to God. We almost intuit that. There's something more to life than just the material. As much as the culture likes to throw the material at us, we know it only goes so far. It will only satisfy us so much. But there's a deeper dimension beyond the material. And it points to that reality that we call soul. And not that the soul and the body are separate. St. Thomas Aquinas often said that the soul contains the body, not the other way around. In other words, the soul is that animating principle that links us to the eternal. So we need to feed the soul, or it starts to shrink, it starts to atrophy, just like the muscles of the body atrophy when not given proper nutrition, proper exercise, proper hydration. And so the spiritual food and nourishment, if we do not take them in, are every bit as important to us as the physical. And the soul can literally hit the wall just like the body can. It can become flabby, it can become lethargic, and it can eventually die. And you know that's happening when you start to feel a sense of loss, disorientation. You feel like you're just drifting. You feel like you've lost all sense of God's presence. You feel you can no longer hear God's voice. And that is exactly what happens when we fail to feed the soul. And I see it all the time. People come and it manifests itself in a variety of symptoms. Psychological symptoms, emotional symptoms, even physical symptoms sometimes. And in order to counteract that, we have to make sure we feed the soul, we nourish it. And there are a lot of ways at our disposal. In the Catholic tradition, we have all sorts of spiritual paths we can take, all ways to feed ourselves spiritually, all sorts of devotions we can take in to use as methods of prayer to help nourish the soul. But in the end, for us, it's finally the Eucharist that Jesus gives. Jesus says, do you want eternity? Do you want eternal life? Do you want that link to the divine life? Then eat my body and drink my blood. It's really that simple. It's really that simple. One of the reasons I think our society at large has become very depressed, very lethargic, even very cynical, because so many of us, so many Catholics, 70%, some people estimate, no longer approach the Eucharist on a regular basis. That has a ripple effect in our communities and in our society. And the sad part is they stay away from the one thing, the very thing that will feed their souls. And so, in light of the readings, if you do feel lost, feel like you're just drifting, feel like Elijah, you just want to give up, lay down and die, you're at the point of exhaustion, then ask yourself, what exactly is your spiritual diet? Do you need to change it? Do you need to beef it up? And are you nourishing yourself on a regular basis with Jesus, the bread of life that comes to us in a very simple but profound manner in the Eucharist that we celebrate week in and week out?
Like what you just heard? Visit Our Lady of Mount Carmel's social media pages for more faith-filled content. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Read the OLMC Tempe blog. Your Catholic community is online. Let's stay connected.